He said no once already. A representative from one of Korea's biggest entertainment companies had already tried to recruit him years before BIGHIT ever entered the picture, and he turned them down flat. Not because he wasn't interested, because he was scared. So when a stranger approached him again years later on a street near his university, why would this time be any different? Here's the stranger part. The man who eventually became Kim Seokjin, the member fans now call worldwide handsome, the vocalist behind some of BTS's most emotional ballads, walked into his own company's building without a single hour of formal singing or dancing training. Not one dance class, not one vocal lesson. While the other future members of BTS had already spent years chasing this exact dream, he hadn't even known it was his dream yet. So how does someone with zero experience end up in one of the most demanding training systems in the entire music industry? How does a theater student who wanted to become an actor end up singing lead vocals on a world tour? And when BIGHIT Entertainment first sat him down, before the choreography, before the vocal coaching, before any of it, what exactly were they signing him up to become? That last question matters more than it sounds like it should, because the answer isn't what most people assume. This is the story of how Kim Seokjin almost didn't make it into the room at all and what happened once he did. Let's start with who he was before any of this began. Kim Seokjin was born on December 4, 1992 in Gwacheon, Gyeonggi Province, South Korea. Long before BIGHIT Entertainment, the company now known as BIGHIT Music, ever crossed his path, Seokjin had a completely different plan for his life. He wanted to be an actor, not a singer, not a performer in the K-pop sense at all. An actor, the kind who studied films, who watched Korean dramas and admired performers like Kim Nam-gil, who imagined a career built on scripts and screen presence rather than stages and choreography. That dream took him to Konkuk University, where he enrolled to study acting and film. As far as Seokjin knew, this was the direction his entire life was heading. But this wasn't the first time the entertainment industry had noticed him. Years earlier, while he was still a teenager, a scout from SM Entertainment, one of the largest and most powerful agencies in the country, approached him and suggested he audition. This is the detail most fans don't know. Long before BIGHIT, long before BTS, one of Korea's biggest companies had already tried to bring Seokjin in. He said no. In a later interview, when asked directly why he never followed up with SM, Seokjin gave a surprisingly honest answer. He genuinely believed the offer was a scam, not a real opportunity, just something to be suspicious of. And underneath that suspicion was something more personal. When members of his own group later asked him about it, curious and half joking, he admitted the deeper reason. He was scared. Think about that for a second. This wasn't reluctance over a minor decision. This was a teenager turning away from one of the most powerful entertainment companies in Korea, not because he didn't want the opportunity, but because the fear of stepping into that world outweighed the pull of it. That single decision could have ended the story before it ever started. If fear had been the final word, there would be no BTS with Kim Seokjin in it, no worldwide handsome, no vocal line built around his tone, none of it. But the story didn't end there. It just went quiet for a while. Years passed. Seokjin grew older, entered university, and settled into the life of a film studies student with an acting dream. He wasn't looking for a second chance at an idol career. As far as he was concerned, that door had already closed by his own choice. Which is exactly what makes what happened next so strange. One ordinary day, while Kim Seokjin was simply getting off a bus near his university, someone was watching him. This wasn't a coincidence, and it wasn't random. It was a scout, this time from BIGHIT Entertainment, and according to Seokjin's own account, the moment played out almost like a scene from the acting career he was hoping for. The scout approached him directly and said something along the lines of never having seen anyone who looked quite like him before. Then came the suggestion, would he be willing to meet with the company? Here's where it gets interesting. Seokjin had already lived through this exact scenario once. A stranger approaches him in public, tells him he has the look they're searching for, invites him to audition. The first time, fear won. He walked away from SM Entertainment without a second thought. So why did he say yes this time? Because he wasn't being recruited to sing. He wasn't being recruited to dance. As far as Seokjin understood it, Big Hit Entertainment wanted him as an actor, a role that fit perfectly with the path he was already on at Konkuk University. This wasn't a detour from his dream. It looked at first like a shortcut straight into it. So he agreed. He auditioned for Big Hit Entertainment as an aspiring actor, not as an idle trainee. In his own mind, this was simply an extension of the acting career he'd already been building toward. Big Hit Entertainment had other plans. The company had reportedly been shifting its direction around this time, moving from what it started as more of a hip-hop-focused lineup toward a fuller idol group, one that balanced rap and vocal performance with stage presence and visual appeal. And in Seokjin, whatever they saw in that moment on the street wasn't just future actor, it was something they believed could work as an idol. So instead of routing him toward acting roles, Big Hit Entertainment made a different offer entirely. They wanted him to train, not for film, but for music, not as a supporting actor in someone else's project, but as a trainee being shaped into a member of what would eventually become BTS. Now, pause here for a second, because this is the part of the story that gets skipped over far too quickly. Every other member who joined Big Hit around this period had some kind of foundation to build on. Some had years of dance training, some had experience rapping, writing, or performing on stage in front of judges and audiences. They weren't starting from nothing, they were starting from experience, refining skills they already had. Seokjin had none of that. He'd never taken a singing lesson, he'd never studied choreography. His entire background was rooted in acting and film studies, completely different disciplines from the ones he would now be expected to master. According to his own later accounts, this wasn't a minor gap, it was a full blank slate. So, the real question isn't just why did Big Hit choose him? The real question is, how does a company justify investing years of training into someone with zero musical background when the entire competitive world of K-pop trainees is built around people who've already been preparing since childhood? This is where almost didn't pass starts to take on its real meaning. Not a single dramatic audition moment where a judge says yes or no, something slower and in some ways more demanding, an ongoing test that would play out over years of training where the margin for error was thin and the starting point was zero. Seokjin accepted the offer. He signed on as a trainee, and in doing so, he agreed to build, from scratch, the exact skill set that every other trainee around him had already spent years developing. What came next would define whether that gamble, from both sides, actually paid off. Walking into Big Hit Entertainment's training system as a complete beginner is one thing. Staying there and improving fast enough to justify the company's decision is another challenge entirely. Seokjin's early days as a trainee were defined by exactly the gap you'd expect. Dance was, by his own admission, particularly difficult at first. Choreography that other trainees picked up through years of muscle memory, Seokjin had to learn from absolute zero, note by note, step by step, often falling behind the rest of the group during early run-throughs. His response to that gap says a lot about who he was becoming. Rather than accept being behind, Seokjin started arriving early to dance practice, sometimes a full hour before the rest of the trainees. He'd also stay late, often another hour after everyone else had gone home, asking instructors to walk through the choreography with him again and again until it started to stick. This wasn't a one-time effort. It became a pattern, a routine built entirely around closing the distance between where he was and where the other trainees already stood. Singing followed a similar arc. Seokjin had never trained his voice before joining Big Hit. Not casually, not seriously, never. So vocal training meant starting completely from the fundamentals: breath control, tone stability, learning how to actually use his voice as an instrument rather than just speaking or shouting the way anyone untrained naturally does. It didn't happen overnight. In interviews years later, Seokjin has been remarkably candid about how difficult this process actually was and still is. He said plainly that the things which come more naturally to other members take noticeably more effort for him. That's not false modesty. That's a direct acknowledgement of the gap he was working to close from day one. But here's the detail that deserves real weight. Despite that gap, he eventually became a tenor with a falsetto strong enough to become one of the group's defining vocal traits. Listen to BTS's more emotional ballads, and Seokjin's voice is frequently the one carrying the most delicate, exposed moments in the song. That's not the voice of someone who simply got lucky with talent. That's the outcome of years spent rebuilding a skill from nothing. Now, here's where the story requires some honesty, because internet narratives love a dramatic near-elimination moment, and it's worth being upfront about what is and isn't confirmed in Seokjin's specific case. Other members of BTS have well-documented stories about nearly being cut during their trainee years. There are accounts of one member being negatively evaluated to the point where the company doubted he could debut at all. There are accounts of another member being dropped from the lineup entirely, only to be brought back after a fellow trainee personally advocated for him. Seokjin's story isn't built on that kind of single dramatic scene. There's no confirmed account of him being formally marked for elimination in an evaluation, the way some of his groupmates were. What his story is built on instead is quieter and arguably just as high stakes, a multi-year uphill climb where the risk wasn't one bad evaluation, it was the ongoing possibility that the gap between him and the other trainees simply never closed enough. That's a different kind of almost didn't pass, not a single verdict delivered in one room, a sustained test repeated daily where falling behind wasn't a moment, it was a constant condition he had to keep fighting against. And the people around him noticed the fight. Fellow trainees, according to multiple accounts during that period, took note of Seokjin's discipline and his consistency. His willingness to put in the extra, unglamorous hours, the kind of effort that doesn't show up in a single dramatic scene but adds up over years, earned him a level of respect among the other future members of BTS. Long before he was known publicly as worldwide handsome or as one of the group's vocal anchors, he was already known internally as someone who worked. But hard work inside a training room is only part of the equation. There was still the matter of the group itself, who would ultimately make the final lineup, and whether the vision Big Hit had for Seokjin back on that street corner would actually hold up once idol training truly began. By the time Seokjin's training was underway, the shape of what would become BTS was slowly coming together. Members like RM, Suga, and J-Hope brought backgrounds in rap, dance, and performance that had already been building for years before Seokjin arrived. Jungkook joined around a similar period, having been scouted by multiple agencies after an audition appearance, while Seokjin, reportedly signing his contract just days before Jungkook did, was still working to catch up on the basics that came more naturally to nearly everyone else around him. According to accounts from that period, Seokjin officially joined the agency in 2011, becoming the fourth member to sign on, though he didn't move into the dorm with the rest of the group until the following year. In between, he was managing something most fans rarely picture when they imagine trainee life: full university coursework at Konkuk University, alongside daily training in singing, dancing, and stage presence. He wasn't just building an idol skill set from zero, he was doing it while still finishing a degree. There's a small but telling detail from this period. Long before BTS had an official presence online, Seokjin was already documenting pieces of trainee life, posting logs, sharing photos of meals he'd cooked for the other trainees, quietly taking on a caretaker role within the group.
Multiple accounts describe him looking after the other members during this pre-debut period, cooking for them, helping get them to school, balancing his own training and university responsibilities while making sure the people around him were taken care of too. That detail matters because it points to something beyond just musical skill. Big Hit wasn't only evaluating whether Seokjin could learn to sing and dance well enough to debut. They were watching how he fit into the group as a whole, and by multiple accounts, what he brought to that group went beyond vocals. Then came debut. In 2013, Kim Seokjin debuted as a member of BTS, the fourth member to have joined the company, now standing alongside the full 7-member lineup that would go on to become one of the most successful groups in music history. The theater student who once auditioned to become an actor was now stepping onto a stage as an idol vocalist in a group built around a completely different skill set than the one he originally set out to master. Here's where it's worth pausing to address something directly rather than skating past it. Some fans and outside observers have over the years questioned why Seokjin specifically was chosen for the group, pointing to his lack of prior training compared to trainees with years of preparation, or debating how his skill set stacked up against the other members early on. This kind of speculation exists online, and it's fair to acknowledge it exists rather than pretend it doesn't. But it's worth being precise about what that speculation actually is: opinion and debate among fans, not a documented fact about Big Hit's internal reasoning. The company's own decision, based on what's publicly known, centered on the shift toward a fuller idol lineup and what they saw in Seokjin during that initial street scouting, not on any confirmed internal ranking of trainees against each other. What is documented directly from Seokjin himself is how he's chosen to respond to those years of catching up, both then and now. In a 2021 interview with Rolling Stone, well after BTS had become a global phenomenon, he was asked directly about what it's been like to learn music performance from scratch. His answer wasn't defensive and it wasn't dismissive of the difficulty. He said plainly that it still takes more effort for him to do the things that may come more naturally to the other members, a struggle he described as being just as true then as it was in his earliest trainee days. That's a strikingly honest thing to admit years into a career built on exactly those skills. Most performers, once they've reached that level of success, might be tempted to smooth over the early struggle, to let the finished result speak for itself. Seokjin didn't do that. He named the gap directly, even after nearly a decade of closing it. And that honesty leads to the part of his story that carries the most weight. Not the scouting, not the training, but what happened once he actually had to stand in front of an audience and prove, night after night, that the years of catching up had been worth it.
There's a difference between training in a practice room and standing on a stage in front of tens of thousands of people who paid to hear your voice. For Seokjin, that difference became the real test, not the audition, not the trainee evaluations, but the years of touring that followed. And in that same Rolling Stone interview, he offered something rare, a genuinely unfiltered look at how uncertain he still felt about his own abilities, even after years as a professional vocalist. He said it plainly: he hasn't mastered singing. Not "I used to struggle," a present tense admission stated by someone who had already sung to sold-out stadiums around the world. He went further, saying there was never really a specific moment where he felt he had truly arrived as a singer, no finish line, no moment of certainty. Sit with that for a second, because it reframes everything that came before it. This isn't a story where the theater student with zero training eventually made it and could finally relax, confident in his own ability. By his own account, that relief never fully arrived. The self-doubt that started the moment he walked into Big Hit Entertainment with no musical background never fully disappeared, even after becoming one of the most recognized vocalists in one of the biggest groups in the world. So what kept him going if not the arrival of confidence? The audience did.
Seokjin described what happened over the course of BTS's world tours, how gradually he began to notice the crowd responding to what he was doing on stage, not just applause, genuine connection. He explained that as the tours went on, he started to see the audience actually liking what he was doing, and more than that, he began to feel a shared emotional experience with them, the sense that what he was performing was resonating outward and coming back to him. That's the real turning point in this story, not a single triumphant evaluation, not a moment where a producer declared him ready. It was accumulated night after night through direct connection with the people listening, proof that didn't come from inside the training room, but from thousands of strangers responding to a voice he'd built entirely from scratch. And despite the doubt that never fully left, Seokjin has described feeling something close to duty when it comes to performing for fans, a sense of obligation to bring them joy through his singing, irregardless of whether he personally feels he's mastered the craft. That's a striking thing to hold at once, genuine uncertainty about his own skill paired with a clear sense of responsibility to keep showing up and giving everything he has anyway. Go back for a moment to where this story started. A teenager who said no to SM entertainment out of fear, a theater student who thought he was auditioning to become an actor, a trainee with zero musical background standing next to future bandmates who'd already spent years preparing for exactly this. Every one of those moments could have gone differently. Fear could have won a second time. Big Hit could have kept him on as an actor and nowhere near a microphone. The gap between him and the other trainees could have simply never closed. None of that happened. Instead, the gap became the story, the thing that makes Kim Seokjin's path into BTS genuinely different from nearly everyone else who stood in that training room with him. He didn't pass the audition because he already had the skills. He passed because he was willing to spend years building them, one early morning dance session and one quiet vocal lesson at a time, long after most people would have decided the gap was too wide to close.